The Supreme Court just made a huge change that affects everyone living in RVs across America.
The Supreme Court also ruled in favor of cities fighting against homeless camps. It was another 6-3 decision, and the justices ruled that cities can enforce bans on homeless people who sleep.
After the January ruling, cities and states can now enforce rules that make it much harder to live in vehicles. This decision could change lives overnight.
Lacking. Now, the High Court ruling that the Eighth Amendment, which bans excessive fines or cruel and unusual punishment, does not extend to bans on outdoor sleeping.
How will RV dwellers survive now? What does this mean for the future of homelessness? Join us as we explore this ruling and what it will cost RV homeless individuals. The January Supreme Court ruling that changed everything. The turning point came in January when the United States Supreme Court released a decision that quietly but deeply changed how homelessness linked to RV living is treated across the country. The ruling did not come from a sudden event. It came after years of growing conflict between cities, residents, and people living in vehicles. By the time the court spoke, many local governments were already waiting for clear permission to act more aggressively. The case reached the Supreme Court because cities across America were divided. Some local courts had limited how far cities could go in punishing people for sleeping or living in vehicles when no real housing options were available. Other courts allowed strict enforcement. This split created confusion nationwide. Cities wanted clarity, states wanted authority, homeless advocates wanted limits. The Supreme Court was asked to settle the issue once and for all. At the heart of the case was a simple but powerful legal question. Can a city punish someone for sleeping or living in a vehicle on public land when that person has nowhere else to go? The court was not asked to solve homelessness. It was not asked to provide housing. It was asked whether enforcing public space rules in these situations violated the Constitution. That narrow question carried enormous weight. RV living became central to the case because it sits between housing and homelessness. An RV is a vehicle under traffic law, but it is also a home for many people. Over time, cities had tolerated RVs parked on streets, in industrial zones, or near public facilities. That tolerance was never guaranteed by law. It existed mostly because cities lacked other answers. As RV living increased, complaints increased too. This pushed cities to test the limits of enforcement. The Supreme Court ruling gave cities and states much broader power. It confirmed that local governments are allowed to enforce rules that limit sleeping, camping, or living in vehicles on public property. Cities can issue fines. They can order people to move. They can tow vehicles that break local rules. They can treat RV habitation as a violation instead of an emergency. The court made clear that these actions do not automatically break constitutional protections. At the same time, the ruling weakened earlier legal barriers that had slowed enforcement. Before this decision, some courts said punishing people with no shelter options could be unconstitutional. That idea no longer controls national policy. Cities no longer have to prove that shelter beds or housing options exist before enforcing bans. This single change reshaped everything for RV dwellers. The effect on people living in RVs was immediate. An RV is not easy to move. It requires fuel, repairs, and legal registration. When parking rules tighten, RV dwellers do not have many places left. One citation can lead to fines. Unpaid fines can lead to towing. When an RV is towed, the person loses transportation, shelter, and personal property at the same time. This chain can happen very fast. The ruling also changed how basic ideas are defined. Public space is now treated as an area cities can strictly control, even when people have no private space to go to. Temporary shelter is no longer a legal shield. Living in a vehicle is treated as a choice under the law, not a necessity created by high rents and low wages. Vehicle habitation is now grouped with camping violations rather than housing survival. Many advocates say this ruling ended legal tolerance for RV homelessness because it removed the last major limit on enforcement. Cities no longer need to pause, negotiate, or delay. What was once informally allowed can now be actively punished. Even cities that want to be compassionate face pressure to act because the legal risk of enforcement is gone. But how did this RV homelessness start in the first place? What is the root cause of this? How RV homelessness began in America? RV homelessness in America grew from one central problem. Housing became too expensive for ordinary people. Over time, rent and home prices increased much faster than wages. People who worked full-time, saved carefully, and lived responsibly still found themselves unable to keep up. When rent rose and pay stayed the same, many households slowly lost stability. RV living increased after housing costs exploded because it was one of the few options left that still offered shelter. Buying or renting an RV required less money up front than renting an apartment. Monthly costs were lower. There were no long applications or credit checks. For people already under financial pressure, RVs became a practical answer when traditional housing closed its doors. Different groups turned to RVs for different reasons. Retirees on fixed incomes could no longer afford rising rents. Their monthly checks stayed the same, while housing costs climbed. RVs allowed them to remain independent. Workers in low-paying or seasonal jobs used RVs to stay close to work. Families used RVs to keep children safe and together. Veterans often chose RVs to avoid shelters that felt crowded or unsafe. For all these groups, RVs were not about comfort, they were about survival. There is a clear difference between recreational RV living and survival RV living. Recreational RV living is planned and optional. It includes travel, campgrounds, and financial security. Survival RV living is unplanned and forced. People live full-time in RVs because they cannot afford housing. These RVs often stay parked in one area for long periods. They serve as permanent homes, not temporary trips. Cities quietly allowed RV parking for many years because officials understood the reality on the ground. Housing shortages were growing. Emergency shelters were full. Banning RVs would push people into tents or sidewalks. Instead of creating open conflict, cities relied on informal tolerance. They used time limits, warning notices, and selective enforcement. This created a fragile balance between rules and compassion. RVs became the last option before full-street homelessness because they offered protection and stability. An RV provides a locked space, shelter from weather, and a place to rest. People could store belongings, cook food, and maintain routines. Losing an RV often meant losing everything at once. That is why many people held onto their RVs as their final safety net. Wages played a major role in the growth of RV homelessness. Pay for many jobs did not rise enough to match living costs. At the same time, affordable housing disappeared. New housing was not built fast enough. Existing low-cost units were replaced with higher-priced ones. This pushed more people into alternatives like RVs. But, before the Supreme Court ruling, this fragile system depended on tolerance and unwritten rules. How exactly did RV dwellers survive day to day under this uneasy balance? Life before the ruling, how RV homeless people survived. Before the Supreme Court ruling, RV homeless people survived through a fragile system built on informal rules, limited tolerance, and mutual understanding. This system was not written clearly into law, but it existed in practice across many cities. It allowed people living in RVs to remain housed even while they lived outside traditional housing systems. Informal rules were the foundation of daily survival. RV dwellers learned where parking was usually ignored and where it was enforced. Industrial areas, wide streets, areas near warehouses, and places with little foot traffic were often safer. These rules were shared quietly through word of mouth. People knew which streets to leave early in the morning and which ones allowed overnight stays without trouble. Overnight parking tolerance zones played a major role. Many cities unofficially allowed RVs to park overnight in certain areas. These zones were not always labeled. They existed because enforcement was limited or delayed. As long as RVs were not blocking traffic, creating noise, or causing visible problems, they were often left alone. This tolerance allowed people to sleep without constant fear of being moved. Cities tried to balance complaints with compassion. Residents sometimes complained about RVs on their streets. At the same time, city officials knew there were few housing alternatives. Instead of immediate punishment, many cities responded slowly. They tried to manage complaints without pushing people into worse conditions. This balance was imperfect, but it prevented sudden displacement. Street permits, grace periods, and warning notices were key tools. Some cities offered temporary parking permits for RVs. Others used grace periods that allowed people time to move before fines were issued. Warning notices were common. These notices informed RV dwellers of rule changes or upcoming enforcement. This gave people time to prepare instead of being surprised. Community networks among RV dwellers helped people survive. RV communities shared information about safe parking, repairs, and resources. If someone's RV broke down, others helped with tools or advice. These networks reduced isolation and made survival easier. People looked out for one another, especially those who were elderly or sick. Children living in RVs relied heavily on stability and routine. Parents worked hard to keep daily life normal. RVs allowed children to sleep in the same place each night, attend school regularly, and maintain privacy. For elderly people, RVs offered independence. They could avoid shelters that felt loud or unsafe. Disabled individuals used RVs to manage health needs with more control over their environment. For many people, RVs were safer than shelters. Shelters often had limited space, strict schedules, and safety concerns. RVs allowed people to lock their doors, protect their belongings, and rest without constant interruption. This sense of control was essential for mental and physical health. But, before the ruling, this fragile balance kept many people housed, even if barely. When that balance disappeared, what exactly was taken away from them? What the ruling actually destroyed? The Supreme Court ruling did not destroy RV homelessness in a loud or dramatic way. It destroyed it quietly by removing protections that once allowed RV dwellers to survive. What existed before was not strong law. It was a thin layer of legal restraint that slowed cities down. Once that layer was removed, the system that kept RV living possible began to collapse. The first major loss was legal protection for parking and habitation. Before the ruling, cities in many places hesitated to punish people living in vehicles if no other shelter options were available. That hesitation mattered. It created time. It allowed RV dwellers to stay in place while searching for work, saving money, or waiting for help. After the ruling, that hesitation is no longer required. Cities are free to enforce parking and habitation rules without considering personal circumstances. The ruling also expanded the power of cities to fine, tow, and seize vehicles. Local governments already had these powers on paper, but now they can use them more aggressively and more often. A parked RV can be ticketed for staying too long, parking overnight, blocking space, or violating zoning rules. Once fines are issued, towing becomes a legal next step. Seizing a vehicle is no longer a last resort, it becomes a routine enforcement tool. Another major change is the shift from civil warnings to criminal penalties. Before, many RV dwellers received warnings or notices asking them to move. These notices gave time and reduced fear. After the ruling, cities can move directly to penalties. Repeated violations can lead to court involvement. This turns daily survival into a legal risk. Living in an RV becomes not just a housing issue, but a legal problem. RVs are now treated as violations instead of homes. Under stricter enforcement, an RV parked on a street is no longer seen as a person's living space. It is seen as an object breaking rules. This change is powerful. When a home becomes a violation, enforcement becomes easier and faster. The human impact is pushed aside in favor of rule enforcement. Towing an RV equals instant homelessness. This is one of the most devastating outcomes of the ruling. An RV is not just transportation, it is shelter, storage, and safety combined. When it is towed, people lose their bed, clothing, food, documents, and medicine at the same time. Retrieving a towed RV costs money most RV dwellers do not have. Many never get their vehicle back. Fines stack up quickly and become impossible to pay. A single ticket may seem manageable, but multiple tickets can appear within days. Each fine adds stress and debt. Late fees increase the total. Court costs may follow. For people already struggling, this creates a trap. Paying fines means skipping food or fuel. Not paying fines leads to towing. There is no easy escape. This ruling hits working RV dwellers the hardest. Many RV homeless people have jobs. They work in warehouses, construction, cleaning, caregiving, and service industries. They depend on their RVs to stay near work. When enforcement increases, they are forced to move farther away. This increases travel costs and causes missed shifts. Losing an RV often means losing a job as well. The cycle moves fast and is hard to stop. The domino effect after a single citation shows how fragile RV living has become. One ticket leads to stress. Stress leads to rushed movement. Rushed movement leads to mechanical problems. If this ruling reshaped the rules for everyone, which people are now facing the greatest harm, and why are they unable to escape it? Who is hit the hardest and why? The Supreme Court ruling affects all RV dwellers, but it does not affect everyone in the same way. Some groups face much greater harm because of age, health, income, and responsibility for others. For these people, RV living is not flexible, it is fragile. When enforcement increases, they have fewer ways to adapt or recover. Elderly RV dwellers on fixed incomes are among the hardest hit. Many older adults rely on monthly payments that do not increase with living costs. Rent increases pushed them out of apartments years ago. RV living allowed them to survive without taking on new debt. With stricter enforcement, elderly people face constant stress. Moving an RV requires strength, money, and quick decisions. Health issues make frequent movement dangerous. Losing an RV for an older person often means losing independence and safety at the same time. Families with children living full-time in RVs face serious risks. Parents choose RVs to keep their children off the streets and out of unstable shelters. An RV allows children to sleep in the same place, attend school, and maintain routines. When RVs are forced to move often, children miss school and lose stability. If an RV is towed, families can be separated. Parents may lose custody temporarily. The fear of this outcome weighs heavily on families every day. Veterans using RVs as permanent housing also face unique harm. Many veterans live on limited benefits that do not match housing costs. Some struggle with physical or mental health challenges. RVs provide privacy and control that shelters often cannot offer. Increased enforcement removes that option. Veterans may avoid shelters due to past trauma or safety concerns. When RV living becomes impossible, many veterans are pushed into deeper isolation. Disabled individuals often choose RVs to avoid unsafe or inaccessible shelters. Shelters may lack proper medical support, quiet space, or mobility access. RVs allow people to manage medications, equipment, and personal care in a controlled environment. When RVs are targeted by enforcement, disabled people lose the ability to manage daily health needs. Frequent movement can worsen medical conditions. Towing can result in loss of vital equipment and documents. Workers who commute from RVs to jobs are deeply affected. Many RV dwellers are employed full-time or part-time. They park near work to reduce travel costs. When parking bans increase, workers are forced farther away. This leads to longer travel times and higher fuel costs. Missed shifts and late arrivals become common. Losing an RV often leads to job loss. Without income, recovery becomes nearly impossible. People living paycheck to paycheck face constant pressure. RV living often represents the last stage before full homelessness. These individuals have little savings. One fine can disrupt their budget. Multiple fines create debt they cannot escape. Paying fines means skipping food, fuel, or medicine. Not paying leads to towing. This creates a trap with no safe exit. Women and children face unique risks under increased enforcement. Women often prioritize safety and privacy. RVs offer protection from violence that is more common in street homelessness. Forced movement increases exposure to danger. Children suffer emotionally and physically from instability. Constant fear affects development and well-being. The loss of an RV removes the last layer of protection many families have. Losing an RV often means losing everything. Unlike apartments, RVs contain all possessions in one place. Clothing, documents, medicine, and personal items are stored inside. When an RV is towed or seized, people lose access immediately. Replacing these items is expensive and difficult. Without identification or records, getting help becomes harder. This loss pushes people further into crisis. As these groups struggle to survive under tighter enforcement, how are cities and states responding right now to the pressure and consequences? How states and cities are responding right now. After the Supreme Court ruling, states and cities across the country moved quickly, but not in the same direction. The decision gave legal clarity, but it did not give instructions on how to enforce it. This has led to different reactions, creating confusion and fear among people living in RVs. Many cities are moving fast to rewrite ordinances. Local leaders are reviewing old parking rules and updating them to match the new legal reality. Some cities are tightening time limits for vehicle parking. Others are expanding no parking zones or adding language that directly addresses vehicle habitation. These changes often happen quietly through city council meetings and administrative updates. For RV dwellers, this means rules can change without warning. States are interpreting the ruling differently. Some state governments are encouraging local enforcement, saying cities now have full authority to act. Other states are taking a slower approach. They are reviewing the impact before pushing changes. This difference creates a patchwork of rules. An RV that is allowed in one city may be illegal a few miles away. This lack of consistency makes planning and stability nearly impossible. In some areas, enforcement increased almost overnight. Parking officers and police were instructed to act more decisively. Warning notices were replaced with tickets. Areas that had been tolerated for years suddenly became off-limits. RV dwellers woke up to notices on their windows or officers knocking on doors. This sudden shift shocked many communities that had lived quietly without conflict. Other areas delayed enforcement due to public backlash. Residents, advocates, and service groups raised concerns about the human impact. Some cities paused changes to study the consequences. They worried about pushing people into tents or sidewalks. This delay created temporary relief, but it did not remove the threat. RV dwellers remain unsure if enforcement will begin later. Police departments gained new authority as a result of the ruling. Officers now have clearer legal backing to enforce parking and habitation rules. This changes daily interactions. What was once a warning conversation can now lead to a citation. This shift increases tension and fear. RV dwellers feel constantly watched and vulnerable. Parking bans, zoning changes, and new fines are spreading. Cities are adding restrictions to residential streets, commercial areas, and industrial zones. Zoning rules are being used to limit where RVs can stay. Fines are increasing in amount and frequency. These measures make legal parking harder to find. Each new rule reduces safe options. Enforcement is uneven and confusing because it depends on local choices. Some cities enforce it strictly, others enforce lightly. Some change rules weekly. This inconsistency makes it hard for RV dwellers to know what is allowed. Information spreads slowly and often through rumor. Mistakes become costly. Fear and uncertainty are spreading among RV communities. People do not know where they can park tomorrow. They worry about losing their homes without notice. Community networks struggle to keep up with changes. Stress affects health, work, and family life. This constant uncertainty is as damaging as enforcement itself. As enforcement spreads and confusion grows, why could these responses make homelessness worse instead of solving it? Why this could make homelessness worse, not better. The Supreme Court ruling was presented as a way to restore order to public spaces, but its long-term effects may create deeper problems. Instead of reducing homelessness, stricter enforcement risks pushing more people into worse and more visible forms of homelessness. When RV living is removed without replacement housing, the problem does not disappear. It changes shape. One major consequence is that RV dwellers are pushed into sidewalks and tents. For many people, an RV is the final barrier between housed life and street life. When that barrier is removed, people do not suddenly find apartments. They move into tents, cars, or open areas. Sidewalks and parks become more crowded. This increases visibility and tension in communities. What was once contained becomes spread out. Emergency shelters are becoming overwhelmed. Shelters already operate at or near capacity in many cities. They were not built to absorb large numbers of former RV dwellers. Many shelters have strict rules, limited hours, and short stays. When RV dwellers lose their vehicles, they turn to shelters out of necessity. This increases wait lists and forces many people to sleep outside when shelters are full. More people are disappearing into unsafe areas. When public spaces are tightly controlled, people move to hidden locations. These areas may lack lighting, sanitation, and emergency access. This increases the risk of injury, illness, and crime. People become harder for service providers to reach. Health problems grow quietly until they become emergencies. Public costs for policing and cleanup rise. Strict enforcement requires more officers, more vehicles, and more administrative work. Towing and storage of RVs costs money. Cleanup of displaced camps costs money. Emergency medical responses increase. These costs often exceed the cost of providing safe parking or basic housing support. Taxpayers end up paying more for a system that produces worse outcomes. The loss of last resort housing options is one of the most serious effects. RVs are not perfect housing, but they provide shelter. When RV living is eliminated, people lose an option that helped them survive. Without replacement housing, enforcement creates a gap that nothing fills. This gap leads directly to increased street homelessness. This ruling does not create housing. It does not fund construction. It does not raise wages. It does not lower rent. It only changes enforcement power. Without addressing the root causes of homelessness, enforcement alone cannot succeed. It removes people from one place without giving them another. The ruling shifts the problem instead of solving it. RVs are moved from neighborhoods to sidewalks, sidewalks to hidden areas to emergency rooms to jails. The problem circulates through systems instead of being resolved. Each shift increases harm and cost. There is a real risk of a nationwide homelessness surge. RV living has grown because housing is scarce. If enforcement removes this option across many states at once, thousands of people could lose shelter quickly. This sudden increase would overwhelm already strained systems. Recovery from such a surge would take years. The ruling creates pressure without relief. It accelerates movement without direction. It increases suffering without reducing need. These outcomes suggest that the problem is not being fixed, but made harder to manage. If enforcement alone cannot solve homelessness, what comes next for RV dwellers and for the future of housing policy? What comes next? The future of RV living and homelessness. The Supreme Court ruling closed one chapter in the story of RV homelessness, but it opened many new questions. What comes next is uncertain, uneven, and deeply connected to how America chooses to respond to housing needs. The future will not be shaped by one decision alone. It will be shaped by laws, local choices, and public pressure. Legal challenges are still possible, even after the ruling. While the court clarified enforcement power, it did not remove all legal limits. Future cases may focus on how rules are applied, not whether they exist. If enforcement becomes discriminatory, unsafe, or abusive, courts may step in again. Lawsuits may also focus on property rights, due process, and the handling of personal belongings. These challenges take time, but they can slow or reshape enforcement. Some states may create their own protections. State governments have the power to limit how far cities can go. They can require notice periods, restrict towing, or protect certain groups. Not all states will act, but some may choose to soften the impact. This would create safer conditions in specific regions, even as other areas remain strict. Local governments are experimenting with safe parking zones. These programs allow RVs to park legally in designated areas with basic rules. Some include access to restrooms, trash services, and security. These zones are limited and often temporary, but they show that alternatives exist. Cities that use these programs often see fewer complaints and lower enforcement costs. Expansion depends on funding and political will. Advocacy groups are pushing back. Housing advocates, legal aid groups, and community organizations are increasing pressure on local leaders. They provide information, legal support, and public awareness. These groups argue that enforcement without housing is harmful and costly. Their efforts influence elections, budgets, and policy debates. Over time, sustained advocacy can change direction. RV dwellers themselves are adapting to survive. Some move more often, some form tighter communities, others seek private land, though access is limited. Many reduce visibility to avoid enforcement. These strategies help in the short term, but increase stress and instability. Survival now requires constant vigilance. New rules and restrictions are likely ahead. Cities may expand bans, increase fines, or shorten parking limits. Technology may be used to track vehicles. Enforcement may become more systematic. At the same time, some cities may pause or reverse course after seeing negative outcomes. The future will not be uniform. It will depend on local values and resources. This ruling signals a shift in homelessness policy. It shows a move toward control rather than care. It places responsibility on individuals without addressing structural causes. It suggests that visibility matters more than stability. This approach may reduce complaints in some areas, but it does not reduce need. America now faces a deeper question about housing and dignity. Is shelter a basic need or a rule violation? Are people without housing problems to be managed or citizens to be supported? RV homelessness sits at the center of this debate because it shows what happens when people create solutions outside formal systems. The future of RV living will depend on whether policies focus on removal or replacement. Enforcement can clear spaces, but only housing can end homelessness. The choice between these paths will define the years ahead. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.